infliction of emotional distress counts. I'm happy, I think, to tell you that I think we've got the apparent agency issue pretty well nailed down. I don't think there's going to be much for you to have to resolve on the language of that at all. But, additionally, I've got motions to add some additional special instructions. So I'm concerned about two things at this point. I can get you a verdict form also before the end of the day. The count 14, as of the current jury instructions that I've just gotten back from the other side, still remains a count on a theory that the hospital as a hospital had a duty to train, not under a medical standard of care, but a common law negligence standard of care, to train doctors, and that if the training was negligent, that they are liable under some theory that doesn't involve the doctors being negligent. So I'll put this into the verdict form and the like, but I want to make it clear that I don't think that is even a legal cause of action. I never have. So I'll put it in. But I am concerned about hearing time and when we're going to resolve this. I don't, I know we have.
Part of my yellow sticky.
Okay, then I'll let you talk about that.
Well, here is, I've got two concepts, and I'll probably need the trial attorney input as well. And I don't know if I can make the decision right this second. Maybe we can make this decision at lunchtime. There are two times on Monday that make sense in my mind. Either we come in early and start doing jury instructions, let's say 8 or 8:15 in the morning, assuming that's, of course, that I get them early enough today, or we do it at 4 o'clock on Monday, and wherever we are at 4 o'clock, we know we just have to stop and then spend time on it. This isn't a final decision, but do you have an input as to what is better?
4 p.m. so we can get our witnesses on.
Yeah, the trial lawyers think 4 p.m. because they'll have witnesses.
Well, I know that that's what they're going to want.
And I am happy to do it, at 6 in the morning or at 10 o'clock at night. You just tell me and I'll be here.
my overarching concern, and we need to, and I'm hoping we are still on track to have all evidence in by Wednesday. That's, I guess, the ultimate goal I've been aiming for. That would include any rebuttal case as well, so that we have a jury instruction set finished Wednesday night. Because remember,
You're gone.
Yeah, and if I absolutely need to figure out a time, I could possibly be here early Thursday morning, but the world works better for me if I could be gone. But
your vision is that these will be read to the jury
on Monday
morning.
And so that's why I need everything to be put to bed, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm, as you were suggesting, we're running out of daylight on nailing these things down. So.
Well,
That's why, Monday morning might.
You in any way I can, and I will try to have the rough out of the verdict form to you before I leave to go back to Chanticleer.
Do you think, even if we do it at 4 o'clock on Monday, that we're going to be, assuming that I'm able to make decisions?
Yeah, it might take more than 90 minutes, but we could get this done, yes.
Let me just make sure that I don't have. Yeah, and Tuesday's Halloween, and I have not been told what my absolute parental obligation is.
But family comes first.
I would not plan on me having the ability to stay Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
The jury's going to feel the same way.
yeah, we'll get them out of here by or before 5.
But I'm probably not going to be able to stay here Tuesday night to work on jury instructions.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on jury instruction?
No. If you have
And
nothing
please
more
pass
for me-
along my appreciation to Mr. Elegant and his team, in addition to you, for working on it. And the last time I looked at it, it was much farther along, and I
Yeah,
really,
the basic things are pretty well hammered down, so, I mean, just, there's several causes of action that's just been troublesome from the beginning, so, thank you.
well, thank you. Before we go to your Excel list, where am I on?
That was next on my list to go. Well, I wanted to make sure I understood exactly what the court wanted. So I've had my assistant create Excel sheets, three separate sheets, one for the joint, one for the defense, one for the plaintiff, but I want to make sure. I was under the impression that the only thing that would be on there would be the exhibit number and a description of the exhibit.
A neutral description of the exhibit.
A useful description of the exhibit.
Useful and neutral.
Yes, no, understood. Like it'll say, all children's hospital admission records from whatever. But I wanted to also clarify, for instance, for the over 1,000 pages of the Johns Hopkins all children's record, was the court envisioning that we would also put like specific page numbers, like you could put discharge, whatever it is, so that they didn't have to search 1,000 pages for specific records, or do you want us to not do that?
I am fine if each side wanted to designate specific pages. And so if plaintiffs wants pages 282, 349, 622, and you want 108, just combine them together. So it wouldn't be a situation where I object to you listing this one. It's like if the plaintiffs want it, put it. If the defense want it, put it.
One place,
Yes.
place. Yes, it would be under the joint exhibit list anyway.
Right, and it probably would be the separate, like the next column over the sub numbers.
So a separate column for that, is what you're saying?
I mean, it might be.
We can figure it out, Judge, but I just want to make sure. So it would just be the exhibit number, neutral description, and if it's broken out in any fashion, that would also be like either underneath it or separate.
Yeah, and I'm also looking at the clerk and making sure this would be helpful to them too. Yes.
Okay, so we started working on that. We're keeping it updated with the exhibits that we're putting in. When does the court, well, when we close, I guess, is when it'd be finished, so.
If we could have a draft Monday morning, knowing that it's not the final one,
That would be fine.
and then that way if we need to make any type of course correction on it, we have a little time.
That's definitely doable. I guess I would ask plaintiff's counsel if they want to get to me anything that they want to, so we just have one Excel thing, if they want to send it over, and we'll include it in that, so we're dealing with.
I would prefer to receive the defendants, and then we would add in and see what they want to do.
I don't care who does it, let's just, if y'all could just talk it. Ms. Croyles apparently already has a list. I don't know if you have a list as well.
No, that's why I say it would be helpful for us. They've already got something going.
No, we created the first list.
Oh, we
Right.
did?
Yeah.
So now it's back over to them?
Well,
Yes.
they
Then it's
created
back
it.
over to us.
They created it, had a lot of things on it. It had the date it was admitted, it had whether there was an objection, it had rulings. We just broke it down to just name and exhibit number, and just copied it and put it in on an Excel spreadsheet.
The jury's only going to get a list of anything that's been admitted. So we don't need to put objections, we don't need to put the date admitted. Would that, I guess
No, I don't think it's gonna be
the jury wouldn't know when we admitted it, so I don't think.
They
we
also
probably
had
need-
like what witness talked about it. I think that's just too much. So we were just gonna put date, the exhibit number, and a description.
Yeah,
That's
and
all
then the
we have.
subcategory. if
And then we
necessary.
can put the subcategories, correct. Okay, we'll have a draft by Monday for Your Honor.
Mr. Anderson, you said you had something to discuss.
Well, two things, Judge. I'm still waiting on Fabre to know how that's going to go because we want
Mr. Altenburn is
I'm sorry, I should have said that the client's given us authorization to withdraw the affirmative defense on the
okay. So the transcript's clear. The defendant has withdrawn the Fabre on affirmative defense. So that simplifies the verdict form and the jury instructions.
Okay, yeah, and that, because we are working on the verdict form, and along those lines, we would move the court to allow us to prepare a worksheet for the court and defense counsel's review on the general damages, so the jury has some context within which to work out an award.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, I think probably the better thing for us to do is actually come up with one and show the court. I've seen it in other cases. I would like to use it here because it is a complex case over a long time, and it helps the jury work through days forward, days back, and some different methodologies, all approved by appellate law as being able to be argued. So if you've got a per diem, or you've got an hour, or you've got a per day, or you've got a per week, and then it's designed so that the jury can come up with some specific numbers, and then they can insert it as they would like to, and it's not just one methodology. But I was hoping to give them something that would allow them, and the other thing is just to have them copying stuff as we put it up on a big board, but then they spend all their time writing stuff down.
Well, this jury doesn't seem to have a problem taking notes.
Yes, I stipulated.
We ended up having to go buy more notepads.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you really?
Yes.
My God. Well, they have written a book for every single witness, it seems.
I think they've gone through 9 packs that are 5-inch thick.
That's
In any event, it doesn't matter. I do know that the defense has filed a motion to limit argument on certain of what you were just saying, so that's going to have to get figured out between now and then.
I understand, Judge. We have the case law now. We're fairly confident, and whenever the court would like to, defense would like to argue it, we can.
But,
be
I
ready.
mean, I don't know if you're asking, I'm not going to be giving the jury, here's this worksheet, and this is what you have to fill out on damages.
No, I wouldn't.
I'm not doing that.
No, it's not coming from the court.
Well,
It just says the court doesn't give advisory opinions, neither will the defense at this time.
So,
That's why I say I will come up with something, and you can all review.
anything else, Mr. Altenburn, since you've come to this
No,
side
I'm
of the
just
bar?
excited about that.
One other housekeeping item, and Madam Clerk, let me know if I misstep on this. There's going to be exhibits that were tendered to the clerk that were not ID'd for purposes of trying to get it in. And so the clerk's normal process is if it's never technically ID'd, it goes back to the parties. Now, obviously, if a party wishes to move something in and it gets ID'd, then it stays with the clerk for the balance, because it then has to go to the appellate court, assuming that there's any type of appeal.
can I ask clarification? Are you saying, am I understanding you correctly, that we handed the clerk, or both sides handed the clerk documents that have not been addressed in any fashion during the court?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's very typical. And here's 100 exhibits, and 25 of them are admitted into evidence. 50 of them are discussed but not admitted. Then there's another 25 that they're holding on to, but really were not discussed in any way, shape, or form. And so that subset of 25 goes back. Now, I'm raising this for 2 reasons. One is to remind, if you want something that you need for appellate purposes, you need to seek to move it in and have it ID'd or whatever you need to do, because at that point, the clerk then holds on to it for purposes of the record. The second thing is, right now there's a whole bunch of documents that don't meet that criteria.
Okay.
And so the clerk, and I'm probably speaking on their behalf, and they will correct me if I'm wrong, probably does not want to hold the tonnage of stuff that is not yet been formally ID'd. So assuming that we finish next Wednesday, perhaps you could have people
Right.
arrange with the clerk maybe on Thursday, come with the dolly carts to take the tonnage of stuff that is not going to be part of the appellate record
Understood,
and get it out.
understood.
Yeah,
Message
it's
received.
quite a bit, Mr. Hunter.
Yeah.
I'm just snickering, I'm thinking about what capacity do you,
Yes. No, we understand and appreciate the issue, and we'll take care of that.
Yeah, so maybe on Thursday, while, after all the evidence is closed, with that, I'll let y'all work it out with them.
Yeah, the timing and when that's available, that's fine.
But I remember when it came in, there were movers that came in with dollies and all of these things, and we'll probably need on
I'm
the
not
back
doing it, so yeah, we're gonna get some help.
would it be okay, just in an abundance of caution, if we did that while the jury was deliberating?
I don't care. The clerk might care. I personally don't care. So that's why don't y'all just talk to them.
Okay.
But
We will, thank you.
the reality is though, when this trial's over, they're going to have to move on to other things, and so I don't want them to have to be up in North County doing something and then having to drive all the way down here just to meet your movers.
We'll, Judge, what I'll try to do, if the court please, I'll talk to the clerk's office about that, but what I'm thinking right now is that it may be most propitious to try to target Tuesday morning or something like that, and have them here and just move it in, move it out.
Well, but, and just as a practical issue, I have not talked to Judicial Security about when the jury is deliberating, whether we're going to allow people to sit in here or if we're going to close and lock the courtroom. So it is possible your movers are not going to be able to come in and out of the courtroom while the jury is deliberating. I have not had a discussion with security about that.
We'll work it out. Okay, very well. If you could keep us advised about that, that would be helpful. Bye.
Yeah, I will. Any other items before we bring in the jury today? Who do we have today, actually?
The first witness is going to be Dr. Jennifer McCain. The second witness, I believe, will be Jason Bankert, the finance expert for all children's.
As to the first witness, Jennifer McCain, Your Honor, we want to ensure that the testimony there does not go over and beyond the court's ruling as to experts and non-retained experts. And we want to ensure if the defense is planning on asking any type of questions along those lines, that they be proffered first so that we don't have to stop the testimony in the middle of it.
Is she a retained expert?
No.
Or
And she was not, neither was she disclosed as a non-retained expert offering opinion. So she is not listed in any way to offer opinions in this case.
tell me who she is. What's her role in this case?
She was the treating psychologist at Tampa General. I'm going to ask her what her notes are, what her opinions were based on her diagnosis and treatment of mine. That's all.
Well,
She's allowed to express her opinions about what her diagnosis was of the
Are
child.
you
when she
going
saw
into
her.
any sort of standard of care or anything like that? So it's based on her observations and her opinions based on what she herself saw
Correct,
At that
and
time.
obviously the consult notes that she would have relied on.
at Tampa General, but not, she's not going to talk about
All children.
what happened in 2016 at all.
No.
So I understand, and then it's just going to be, and I reached a diagnosis, and what is that diagnosis? And then we're not going to go into, well, did you see any signs of, or did you do this? And things outside her records is my concern. I don't want them finding a way into her speculating on things that were not part of her review at that time in that one admission in August of 2015.
Well, it sounds like Mr. Shapiro is going to be restrained, and I trust your ability to stand up and object.
I'll do my best.
I'm not sure we've heard the word objection in this case. So, but I trust your ability to do that.
I'll figure that one out.
Anything else?
Not from the defense firm.
And not from the plaintiff counsel.
Bring in the jury. How you feeling?
All rise. Jurors entering.
Okay, please be seated, everyone. Happy Friday. I want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct?
Correct.
And no one approached you about this case. Is that correct? And you have not seen any media accounts about this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shapiro, your next witness, please.
Call Dr. Jennifer McCain.
Why don't we have, starting with the plaintiffs, take appearances. Ms. Lawrence. Thank you.
Ethan Shapiro, Pat Kroles, Howard Hunter, David Hughes, joined by Dr. Jenny Dolan.
And thank you, Ms. Kroles, for reminding me.
Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. We're going to come around this way.
May it please the court.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Jennifer McCain.
Okay. And Dr. McCain, there's a microphone in front just to make sure that everyone can hear.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. And what's your profession?
I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist.
Okay. And where do you practice medicine?
I work at Tampa General Hospital.
In terms of your education and training, I'll just try to see what we can walk through briefly. Where did you get your undergraduate degree?
University of California, Santa Barbara.
Okay. And I hate to date people, but when did you graduate?
92.
And what did you do after you graduated from college?
I went to graduate school at Long Island University,
What did you study?
clinical psychology.
And what year did you graduate?
I did.
Yeah, what year did you graduate?
1996.
And what degree did you obtain?
A doctorate in clinical psychology.
And where did you go for work after that?
Peninsula Hospital, Beth Israel.
And what were you practicing there?
Partly that was the beginning of a fellowship, and it was neuropsychology and traumatic brain injury.
And then within the field of psychology, do you hold any board certifications?
Yes, I'm board certified in clinical neuropsychology and recently boarded with a subspecialty in pediatric neuropsychology.
Where do you currently practice?
Tampa General Hospital.
And how long have you been at Tampa General?
A little over 16 years.
And what role, or do you have any department chairs or titles there?
I'm the vice chief of the psychology section for medical staff, and I'm a pediatric neuropsychologist.
Were there times that you served as the chief of psychology at Tampa General?
Yes.
And for what years?
Oh gosh, I don't recall off a couple of times, I think. And I think, I'm sorry, I don't know the years.
Okay.
There were 2 stints, and there were 2 years each. And this year I'm vice chief.
We're going to talk to you a little bit about, well, let me just ask you before we talk about Maya Kowalski. Do you have any specialties or subspecialties in the field of neuropsychology?
No, my work at Tampa General is focused on brain injury and trauma and pediatric rehab.
So we're going to talk about your care and treatment of Maya. Before we get there, have we ever met before?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I'm not that famous, but have we ever spoken before?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you about your time with Maya Kowalski, and I'll just represent to you that Maya was a patient at Tampa General from July 31st, 2015, until about August 27th, 2015, okay? And we're going to show you some of your records, so it won't be a memory contest. Okay. Let me start with asking you, what role does psychology play in a patient like Maya who's admitted to rehab?
So psychology is part of the interdisciplinary team, which includes the physiatrist, who is the medical director of the program, a nurse practitioner, and then there's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech-language pathology, child life, nutrition, and I don't know if I'm forgetting, and then the school is also involved.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you about some of your treatment of Maya, and it starts at Defense Exhibit 3047-0037. And I'll focus you at the bottom. Your consult's going to be on the next page, but just for the sake of the date at the very bottom, this is your first consult. And just for the sake of time, I'll represent to you that Maya was admitted the day before.
Okay.
And we can turn the page now. So this is your first consult note. I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
And I'm sorry, is it okay if I get my reading glasses?
Yeah, please, for sure.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. At the top it says, we don't need to focus in, but it says reason for referral, rehab, and then it says referred by pediatric rehab. Would that be Dr. Kornberg to the
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Kornberg would be overseeing the pediatric rehabilitation?
Correct.
I'm going to ask you about the history of present illness section. And while you're looking through that, what is a history of present illness?
It's basically the history of what brought her into rehab.
Is this the history given to you by the parents?
No, it's through the medical records.
Okay. At least in terms of what you had reviewed, about halfway down, it talks about an admission to All Children's on 7/7/15, and that she was seen by Dr. Casadante, neurology at All Children's. Is that right?
Correct.
Would that have been something that you saw in the review of past medical records?
Yes.
And then at the bottom of this, it looks like that you had a conversation with Mr. Kowalski. Is that right?
You mean part of the evaluation?
Yeah, it says that the family had told you the father reported a second opinion in Chicago. Do you see that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So let me ask you a little bit about your what you noted later on this note at page 0040. At the top it says family historian dad. From looking at your note, would it be fair to say that it was just dad that was with Maya at this point?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to go down a little bit to your assessment of current neurocognitive and behavioral emotional status. And just take a moment to read it, and I'll ask you a couple of questions on this section.
Okay.
Okay. You're charting in the first sentence about when you entered the room, Maya was coloring and the mood was euphemic? Is that-
Euthymic. It's neutral, meaning there was no evidence of depression.
In reviewing this, when you saw Maya on July 31st, 2015, did Maya report to you any incidences of pain?
I don't independently recall. It's whatever is in my notes.
At least according to what you wrote here in terms of your assessment, is there any indication that Maya was having any pain?
No.
At the bottom, you talked about introducing the role of hospital homebound school. What is that?
Hospital Homebound School is a program for children who are unable to attend school either for a medical reason, and they have to be at least in the state of Florida, they have to be absent for 15 continuous days before they qualify.
And then if we scroll down a little bit under the treatment plan and the family goals, I wanted to ask you about a couple of these interventions. It says cognitive restructuring. What does that mean?
Just really looking at the way people think and how they may not, the thoughts may not be rational.
Is that something that you planned on working on with Maya?
It was one of the plans, yes.
And then on the bottom, family goals, there's a sentence that says family will be able to accept patients' medical condition, disability. What are you referring to there, doctor?
That family will be able just to accept and understand whatever diagnosis that she has.
Okay. I'm going to take you to your next note, which is at 3047-0372. This would be about 5 days later. And we can scroll to the bottom of the page where your note starts. You can take a moment to read the session note, and then I'll ask you a couple questions if you don't mind.
Okay.
At the top it says that you met with team consultation with physical therapy. What's the goal of meeting with physical therapy at the same time?
A lot of times when a child has difficulties or behavioral issues in therapy, we often do something called co-treatment, where we work together to try to figure out the best way to address those behaviors.
About halfway down the first paragraph, you had noted during physical therapy, Maya was calm. And in the second sentence, you noted that, however, when discussion turned to her brother, Mom, who she states is always working and is always on her computer, she became increasingly whiny and flopped on the bed.
Objection, reading medical records.
Okay. If you look at that second sentence where you just discussed your conversation with Maya, what was the significance of recording that?
The significance was looking at how drastically the behavior changed when the topic was switched to an issue related to her family.
When you put in quotations something like is always working and is always on her computer, is that to reflect whether that came from Maya?
Yes.
During this session, you recorded that Maya had complained of pain everywhere. Were you able to elicit responses from Maya as to where the pain was?
According to my notes, it said she only said that her stomach hurt, or did not hurt, I'm sorry, and rated her head pain as 8 or 9 out of 10.
Did you make any notations of how Maya did once she was returned to her wheelchair?
Yes, she was able to sit up straight and seemed happy and was not complaining of pain or discomfort.
Did you have a conversation with Maya about whether she was making improvements?
Yes, I did.
And what was that discussion?
We were really trying to focus on improvements, and she was having a hard time appreciating her improvements.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Kowalski about his observations of Maya's behavior?
I'm not sure if it was a conversation, but I did document that he understands that the behavior is filled with exaggerations.
And then at the end, you noted that you wanted to meet with Mom. Why is that?
I'd like to meet with everyone in the family.
A couple other words that I'm not sure what they mean, so I'll see if you can help me. In the section of mood, what is dysphoric?
That just means sad.
And what is labile?
Where emotions are very, a person can cry very easily, kind of like at the drop of a hat. Sometimes it's in relation to something stressful, and sometimes it could not be.
Let's turn to the next page. It's 373, please. I'll take you to the end of your note. In terms of the interventions, what do you mean by behavioral management?
I think in that case, it would be related to giving positive reinforcement for behavior that is not exaggerated, and ignoring behavior that is exaggerated.
Do you mean from working with the parents to make sure they're rewarding the behavior that you think is going to help Maya progress?
Correct.
And in terms of cognitive restructuring, what do you mean by that?
It's just a term used to look at the way a person's thinking about things and think if it's something that's rational and it's realistic, and if it's something that's hurting them.
In the next sentence, you talk about a concept called behavior dysregulation. What is that?
I think it's just again a general term for inability to regulate your behavior.
Let's talk about your third visit, which starts at 0349. And again, the way this prints your note just starts at the very bottom. And notes that you saw Maya 2 days later on August 6th. So we'll go to the next page, 0350. And did you have a chance to meet with Mrs. Kowalski on this day?
Yes, I did.
Okay, take a moment to read your note about this, and then I'll have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
As of this third visit, you made a comment that the Maya's presentation was highly indicative of conversion disorder. What did you mean by that, doctor?
Well, conversion disorder is where you have a presentation of neurological symptoms, primarily something related to motor, which is if you're weak in sensation, that cannot be explained by a neurological disorder.
Did you provide Mrs. Kowalski with any educational written material?
Yes, I did.
Is that standard handouts that you have in your practice?
Yes.
In your practice, in your experience, have you treated conversion disorder in the past?
Yes.
In your practice and experience at Tampa General, had you treated children with CRPS in the past?
Maybe one or two.
And when you had this discussion with Mom about conversion disorder, what was her reaction, at least according to your note?
According to the note, that she verbalized similar observations and appeared to be accepting of this diagnosis.
And I should have asked, you do have some recollection independent of Maya Kowalski, is that fair?
I mean, very general.
Okay. Let's talk to you about your fourth visit, which is at 0282. And the note is at August 11th, so this is about 5 days later. And if you can take a look at your session description, and I'll ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
According to your note, at this point, it was Mr. Kowalski with Maya, not Mrs. Kowalski. Is that fair?
Yes.
How was Maya doing on this day in terms of her pain?
I'm sorry, no, it says I met with Maya individually that day.
Okay.
Dad must have come in at the very end, though, because there's a note at the end.
So when you initially went to meet with Maya, she was on her own?
I'm sorry, I can't tell from the note.
When you had a chance to meet, it looks like you met with Maya while she was in her wheelchair. During that initial meeting, did Maya express to you any signs of pain?
No, she did not.
You noted that she was putting together a scrapbook. Why was that significant to you?
That was significant because she had often complained of weakness in her hands and not being able to do those types of tasks.
Did that represent improvement to you?
Yes, it did.
You have a conversation in the next sentence about Maya raising concerns about not going to school. What was your response to that?
I told her that she would be able to return to school because of her progress.
You noted that Maya was open in discussing family dynamics. Let me ask you a question about that. Is your discussion of family dynamics something that you typically do with children who are undergoing psychological care for rehabilitation?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because a lot of times there's family dynamics that are contributing to the current presentation.
What did Maya tell you when discussing the family dynamics?
That she wanted to spend more time with Mom, and Mom was working a lot.
And it looks like you asked Maya to be able to share that with Mr. Kowalski?
Yes.
And Maya agreed?
Correct.
And did you have a chance to talk to Mr. Kowalski about this?
Yes, I did.
And what did, in your conversation with Mr. Kowalski, did he convey to you what his observations were of the interactions between Maya and Mrs. Kowalski?
He indicated that Mom worked a lot and had decreased interactions and time with the family, and that he was the primary caretaker.
And did Mr. Kowalski express any opinions to you about his thoughts on outpatient treatment?
Yes, he agreed with it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about your next visit, the 5th visit, which starts at 0248. And again, this one starts at the very bottom, but we'll move to the next page. And this is the next day. You had previously been on 812. So let's look at your note from 813, and I'll let you read your session. And then I'll have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
In your opinion, after having this session, did it appear that some of Maya's behaviors were trying to get the attention of her mother?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that significant to you as a neuropsychologist?
That's significant because that appears to be one of the issues that's contributing to her disability.
When a little later down in the note, it looks like you had a conversation with Mrs. Kowalski about conversion disorder.
Yes.
And what was her response?
That she did not agree with the diagnosis.
Do you remember anything further about that conversation that you had with Mrs. Kowalski?
I don't.
And then at the end of your note, you documented a difference in Maya's reaction when you were there and when you left. Is that true?
Correct.
And how were you able to make those observations?
How was I able to make them?
Yeah, so just describe how that happens in general. If you
So when we were talking about going home, and Maya was very upset, and when this happened, we were all trying to ignore her behavior, and she was continuing to cry, but when I went up to leave, her behavior stopped immediately.
Let me ask you about your 6th visit, which starts at 0233. This would be the next day as well. And let me just ask you, is this a typical cycle where you're meeting with family and children every day through the course of rehab, or is this a little more frequent, if you know?
It really depends on the diagnosis and the needs of the family and the patient.
Were Maya's psychological needs, from your perspective at this time, more intensive?
Yes.
Let me ask you about your session note. And let me know when you've had a chance to read the first part, and then we'll turn to the second page, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
And Clay, if you can go to the next page, and I'll let you read the top, and then I'll go back to the first. I have a couple
Okay.
of questions. Okay, so let's go back to the previous page, Clay, at 0233. And then this is the sixth visit. You had a meeting with Mom, is that correct?
Correct.
And why do you note that you are observing Maya in physical therapy? Why would you be doing that?
To see what her progress was like, see if there was any inconsistent behaviors.
And then in the next sentence, you note a conversation about consideration of functional neurologic system disorder. What is that?
That's just a term that's used sometimes interchangeably with conversion disorder.
And do you have a recall of how this discussion went?
No, I don't.
According to your note, does it appear to you that Mom showed some resistance but openness to this diagnosis?
She wanted to wait until the neurology consult had been complete before considering it.
And what would be the importance of a neurology consult in that regard, from your perspective?
To rule out any organic neurological disorders.
And just at the bottom, it looks like you were taking a well-earned vacation. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then let me show you what's 0029. And in fact, Clay, we might want to start at 0028 for a moment. Thank you. Do you know who Dr. Maria Giron?
Garone, yes.
Garone, yeah. I'm going to botch it, so why don't you pronounce it for me? Dr. Garone?
Yes.
Who is she?
She's a pediatric neurologist.
And was this the neurology consult that, would this neurology consult be something that you would review in your course of practice?
Yes.
And it appears this neurology consult, when you had seen Maya last and discussed this potential, was August 14th, so this would be 3 days later. I'm going to ask Clay to go to the next page, 0029. What part of the note would you review? Would it be the impressions, the plan?
I mean, essentially, I look at the entire consult note.
From your standpoint as a neuropsychologist treating Maya, what was the significance of your review of this neurology consult?
Section calls for comment on another physician outside the range of the qualifications and without foundation, right, getting beyond the scope as to the prior court order.
Did this neurology consult inform your future care of Maya?
It helped to inform my future care, yes.
And how?
Because Dr. Garone could not find a neurological explanation for her symptoms.
Let's ask you about the next note at 0108. And this would be the 7th visit. Looks like you're back from vacation. Take a moment to read your note, and then I'll have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
Did Maya express any pain to you during this session?
I don't see that she expressed pain, no.
You documented some discussion with Maya about her school, and why did you do so?
Because she was getting discharged and we were talking about returning to school.
And at least from your standpoint as a treating neuropsychologist, was it your opinion that Maya would be able to return to school?
Yes.
Did you chart or recall what Maya's reaction to that was?
She initially said she wasn't worried about missing school, but she also did not appear motivated to return to school or work on some of her schoolwork while she was in the hospital.
In the second, towards the bottom of the paragraph, you discussed family discord and its contribution to the symptom profile. What are you referring to as family discord?
I don't know. I mean, I would assume it was based on, some of her.
Objection, speculation, without
So,
foundation,
yeah.
predicate.
Sustained.
In your experience as a treating neuropsychologist, how does family discord in general contribute to a symptom profile?
Same objection is directed towards.
Madam Court Clerk, can I have that question again, please?
Question, in your experience as a treating neuropsychologist, how does family discord in general contribute to a symptom?
Sustained.
Um,
No, you gotta wait for the next question.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Let me ask you about your next note, which is at 0056. It's titled Psychology Service Discharge Summary. Why do you prepare a note such as this?
just to summarize the visit and what the discharge plan is.
And are these diagnoses listed here? Well, let me just back up for a moment and establish the date. This would have been done on the date of Maya's discharge, is that right?
Presumably.
Okay. Well, your note is dated the August 27th, date of discharge is listed as the 27th.
Okay.
At least would be your intention to file
Correct.
the most current report. Okay. You have some diagnoses here. What is diagnosis number 4?
Psychological factor affecting physical condition.
And what does that mean?
That someone is having a physical condition that there's some kind of psychological contribution.
In terms of, at the bottom it says, if you could scroll down a little bit, barriers to community reintegration include caregivers' job obligations. What were you referring to there?
I don't know, just job obligations that might interfere with them being able to carry out the discharge plan.
Let me ask you about some of your observations on page 0057. You can take a moment to read it. I'll have a couple of questions when you're done.
Okay,
You had made some recommendations to the Kowalskis for future care,
correct.
and what were those?
To follow up with mental health after discharge.
And why did you believe that was medically necessary in your opinion?
Because in treatment of conversion disorder, that is the treatment of choice.
And in terms of referral information, did you provide specific information as to where the family could seek those services?
Yes, I did.
In the part about meeting with Maya prior to discharge, what were your observations?
That she was very anxious about going home.
And she wanted to go home, or she wanted, what was your impression?
That she was just more anxious than usual about going home.
And you had a discussion about feedback about recovery and focus on return to school. What would that conversation entail?
Just about the importance of returning to school, and she might need some accommodations upon return.
When you last saw Maya on August 27th, was it your opinion from a neuropsychological standpoint that she'd be able to return to school?
Yes.
Let me ask you about document 3047 at 0014. I'll represent to you, this is the comprehensive discharge summary, and you're welcome to read the whole thing. I was just going to ask you about your contribution to it.
Okay.
When the discharge summary, and in this case I'll represent to you, is prepared by Dr. Kornberg and his nurse practitioner, okay, do they ask for your input, or is this pulled over? How does this process work?
That's pulled over. Every week we have rehab staffings where we provide updates about how the person is doing. So it looks like this was pulled from that.
And tell me a little bit about those meetings. Are those weekly meetings at Tampa General where you discuss patients?
Yes,
Is that an interdisciplinary team meeting?
it is.
I'm going to ask you about your last interaction, which is at 0051. Looks like after discharge you followed up with Mrs. Kowalski. Take a moment to read the note.
Okay.
What were you charting in terms of this note?
About Maya's return to school.
And as of that time, from your standpoint as a neuropsychologist, you believe Maya was ready to return to school?
Yes.
Come on. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Plaintiffs.
Hi, I'm the Kowalski's lawyer. So, you're at Tampa General. Is that the largest hospital in the Bay Area?
I don't know.
Is it one of them?
I'm sure it is.
How about Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital? Is that one of the largest in the Bay Area?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. So, would you agree with me that psychology is not exactly an exact science?
Yes, I would agree.
All right. And let's look at 3047-0056. I wanted to go over exactly what the discharge notice stated. 3047-0056. Just up. Okay. Under diagnoses there, do you see it?
Yes.
What are the diagnoses?
History of steroid-induced myopathy, myalgia and myositis, quadriparesis, and psychological factor affecting physical condition.
Okay. Do you see the diagnosis of conversion on there?
No, I don't.
With a child, in fact, anyone in extreme pain, would you agree with me that there is always a psychological overlay to some extent?
Probably.
And so, did it also come to your attention that after discharge, you recommend they follow up with, mental health care counseling, that they did in fact follow up with Eagle's Wings in Venice?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Did you ever determine whether they followed up with either of your recommendations or whether they went to another place, in this case, Eagle's Wings Psychology in Venice?
Okay. No.
If they did, then that would be following up with what you recommended.
Correct.
How many, just out of curiosity, about how many sessions per week, in your experience? Now, you weren't board certified in pediatrics at the time Maya was in, is that right?
Pediatric neuropsychology, correct. That was not an option at that point. That was a new board.
But you are now, is my point.
Correct.
All right. And so the reason I ask that is just your experience about how often in an inpatient setting, to be really effective, should a psychologist meet with the child. And I say that noting that I think you met like 5 times or over 5 hours in 2 weeks. So I just wanted to get an idea of how often, to get a good result, a psychologist, psychotherapist should meet with the child.
Your Honor, I object based on, I guess I'll just briefly clarify this.
So I just want, let's just, are we correct that you met Maya and/or her parents for 5 hours plus over 2 weeks?
If that's what it says in the chart, yes, that's correct.
Not a memory test, I was just wondering, does that sound about like what you were doing?
That, sure.
Okay. Now, would you agree with me that it's not exactly rare for a child, a 9-year-old girl in this case, to want to spend more time with her mother?
Yes,
That's pretty common, isn't it?
correct.
And it would not be unusual for a 9-year-old child to be more expressive about their pain, their emotions, how they're feeling with a parent as opposed to a stranger.
Not necessarily, no.
I see. So you do not agree that children tend to open up more to their parents than they do to someone they don't know well at all?
No, I don't agree with that.
You think that they would just, but in that instance, aren't you talking about children with grave psychiatric problems or issues? You're not talking about a normal 9-year-old, are you?
I don't know what a normal 9-year-old is, but a lot of times children have a easier time opening up to people who are objective and outside of the family.
Okay. But in this case, you felt that she was opening up more to her parents than you.
I don't recall that, no. I don't know if that was part of my notes.
That when the parents left, she became much more quiet and much less expressive, I think is what you testified to, right?
Actually, that changed. I think at one point she was happy when they were gone.
Okay. Through this period of time, did it come to your attention that Maya found her therapy to be incredibly painful?
I don't know about, I would say distressing. I'm not sure about painful.
All right. Well, let's look at Exhibit 2529-35. What are those on her feet?
Those are braces.
Corrective boots?
I don't know the exact term.
Does that look like a happy child to you?
I can't speculate from a picture.
You're a pediatric neuropsychologist, and you can't tell us from this photograph whether that child doesn't look distressed, concerned, in pain,
She could.
otherwise negative?
She could.
All right. And so a child in pain is, for instance, you said that what was significant to you was that you saw her during a physical therapy session, and it was significant when she returned to the wheelchair, she stopped complaining, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So is it just possible that she stopped complaining because she stopped the physical therapy that was hurting her?
It seemed to me it was more related to the discussion that was happening.
I see. So that child right there, the simple fact that no one's hurting her anymore, that had no effect on your opinion.
Not that it didn't have any effect, no.
All right. And you would agree with me that Maya tried as hard as she could in these physical therapy sessions from everything you saw and heard.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again, please?
That Maya tried as hard as she could in these physical therapy sessions from everything that you saw coming in on some of them and read.
I haven't read any of the physical therapy notes. I apologize, so I can't
Okay.
comment on that.
So you don't know one
So I
way or
don't
the other?
know.
Fair enough. All right. And so at that point, you said there was a consult from Dr. Giron. Is that how you
Correct.
pronounce his name?
Garone, her, yes. She.
Okay. And is he a pediatric neurologist, or is he a neurologist? What is he?
She is a
I'm
pediatric
sorry.
neurologist.
I didn't know.
Mhm.
She's what?
Yes, she is a pediatric neurologist.
Okay. How long did she spend, if you recall?
I don't know.
From that note, did you see where she did a differential diagnosis to rule out any other possibilities?
I'm sorry, I don't have that note in front of me, so I have no idea what's in that note.
I don't know if you've got that to pull up real quick. We do great. No, it's okay.
No, we don't.
All right.
Catch that.
Okay. And just to make sure we're clear here, your contact with the Kowalskis was approximately, let's see, it was in August of 2015?
Correct.
So if she went into Johns Hopkins All Children's for the visit in question here, that would be some, 14 months before? She went in October of 2016?
Oh, you mean, and she was in Tampa General 14 months before?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And throughout the time that you dealt with the Kowalskis, they were cooperative. Not Maya, but Jack and Beata.
Correct.
And they were accepting of your diagnoses for the most part, were they not?
Mom had trouble accepting the diagnosis.
Initially, she agreed, and then she came back and said, I'm concerned this may not be correct, right?
Correct.
So, as far as you saw, they were perfectly normal, concerned parents.
Again, I don't like to use the word normal, but they did seem to be concerned, yes.
And they were not displaying any aberrant behavior or anything that caused you any concern that there was a psychosis or psychological problem going on with either one of them?
Mr. Anderson's going to ask you a new question.
Right. That's fine. Yeah. Just the last question. Did you ever receive, and I don't know, maybe it's the first time you're aware that Maya Kowalski went back in patient at a hospital at Johns Hopkins in October of 2016? Did that come to your attention before this?
No, I wasn't aware.
Well, let me just ask you, did you ever receive, or do you notes reveal, that Dr. Kastenstein there ever called you about your experience with Maya?
Same objection.
That question's allowed. You can answer that.
I have no independent recollection of speaking with her, no.
Thank you.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Yes.
Clay, can you put back up 3047-0029? You were asking questions, Doctor, about Dr. Geron's pediatric neurology and whether there were differentials. Take a look at that for a moment from your perspective as a neuropsychologist. And I was going to direct your attention to the plan. Do you know what an EMG nerve conduction study is?
I know of it. I don't know the specifics, though.
At least according to your review of this report, Dr. Geron continued to try to do evaluations going forward to see if there would be evidence of a physical neurologic condition.
Objection leading. Overruled.
Correct.
And Dr. Geron spent, at least according to her note, an hour, if you look at the bottom, Clay,
Okay.
an hour going through records, including prior records. True?
Correct.
Let me ask you about a note that Mr. Anderson asked you about. We'll put it up so you can review it again. It's at 0372. And you can read it again, because I have a question for you. Mr. Anderson asked you about whether the pain was from physical therapy or the pain was from something else. So take a moment to read it, and then I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
From your review of the note, did it appear that Maya was having pain from therapy, or did the pain come out of the blue from some other source?
It seemed to come out of the blue.
And then lastly, you were asked about whether there was a discharge diagnosis. And again, for planning for discharge, can you explain to this jury, you're sitting down with the interdisciplinary team to come up with a diagnosis altogether? Is that how this works?
No, the diagnoses, I don't know if Dr. Kornberg enters them, but every diagnosis entered is included in that list.
Do you contribute your thoughts directly to Dr. Kornberg so he can have the benefit of your neuropsychological impressions?
Yes.
Let me show you what's in evidence as same chart, Clay, but at 0010. You were asked a question. We'll represent to you this is Dr. Kornberg's discharge diagnosis. You were asked a question whether conversion disorder or psychological factors were part of the discharge. Take a moment to read this, please.
Okay.
Was your suspicion of conversion disorder included in the potential discharge diagnoses of Maya?
Yes, it was.
Thank you for your time.
Dr. Kornberg, a neuropsychologist.
No, he's not.
So, what we have here, Maya had an apparently inexplicable source of pain at times. Is that
Okay.
true?
Yes.
Anything further, Mr. Shapiro?
No, thank you.
Members of the jury? Any other questions coming? We'll just stay here. Dr. McCain, the jury has a couple of questions. I'm just going to ask those questions to you.
Okay.
In your testimony, you've used the phrase similar to, quote, psychological contribution, end quote. Should I interpret this to mean there is a mental component, but there is also a physical component, or does your phrase psychological contribution mean there is no physical component?
That's a hard question to I mean, there's a physical component because there are physical symptoms and those symptoms are real, but we cannot find a physical diagnosis to explain those symptoms. But they continue to be real, but the what is fueling those symptoms are psychological factors.
You said you don't know what a, quote, normal child is, end quote. With your training, years of practice, fellowship, and board certifications, could you possibly agree that there are certain, quote, norms, end quote, that can or should be used in evaluating what is, quote, normal, end quote, behavior, in this case, for a child raised in Maya's social economic family unit?
Yes.
Well, let me continue. I think it kind of goes on. We don't have a general, quote, baseline, end quote, to use. And if you don't know what a normal child is, how do you know when a child is abnormal or in need of your services?
And I think there are certain situations where you have normal, like for instance IQ. You have, you have what is considered normal performance, and you have aberrations of that. I think in terms of behavior, you have norms. But I just think generally, I'm talking about what is normal to a child. Every child is so different. I think that's what I was referring to.
Mr. Shapiro, do you have any follow-up?
Just briefly, if we can go back to 0372. You can take out the bottom part of the page for her now. You were asked about psychological factors. Was part of your assessment of that based on the inconsistencies that you saw in Maya's presentation?
Yes.
And in terms of her behavior and your observation of some of it being exaggerated, what was the significance to you of Mr. Kowalski also seeing that behavior?
Because in a condition like this, the more that the parents and caregivers understand what's going on, the more appropriate support they can give to help with progress.
Okay. Thank you. That's all, Your Honor.
Mr. Anderson, any further questions?
I'm going to show you a clip here. Two questions. The first one is, have you seen this before? And I'm not going to show the whole clip. I've seen it many times, but I just wanted to show you a little bit here. And the second question is, does it appear that this child is trying as hard as she can?
She might be.
Good. That's straightened up your That was good. Can you press up a little bit for me?
That's Marissa Higgins?
Yes.
There you go. Come on, Brady. Come on, you're doing it. Toes forward. Toes forward. There you go. All right. Come on, Lefty.
It's not going.
You gotta talk it to it. Come on, you gotta talk it out. You got it nice and tall, nice and tall. Spank the horsey on the butt. There you go. There she is. Nice job. Sorry, Maya. Trying to get the best position here. There you go, you got it.
You can read it right after I see it.
Okay.
Toes forward, toes forward.
There you go. Good job. All right. Here we go, Maya. Done? Oh, no, we have 5 more feet. Here we go. Come on.
still think this is conversion disorder?
Based on my experience with her, yes.
Anything further, Mr. Shapiro?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Members of the jury, any further questions? not going to be able to ask the question that was asked, but I'm going to allow the attorneys to ask additional questions. Mr. Shapiro, did you have any other questions?
Not at this time, no.
Mr. Anderson?
Did you have the opportunity to review any of the therapist's notes for that clip there, for that time?
No, I was not.
So you can't tell us one way or the other what was noted in there as to whether it was consistent or not with your therapy?
Correct.
Just one question, Your Honor.
Sure.
And I don't need to pull up your notes, Dr. McCain, but you actually took it upon yourself to personally observe Maya in therapy more than once. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Anderson?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further from the jury? Okay. Got another juror coming. Another question coming. The jury, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to ask that question. So, I think we have now completed, unless there's any other question from anybody. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
And released from any subpoenas?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Members of the jury, this is probably a good time for us to take a morning stretch break. We'll try to keep it between 5 and 10 minutes. I'm learning. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information.
All rise. Jurors exited.
The jury is out of our presence. Any issue we need to address before we go on our break? Mr. Hunter.
We approach, Your Honor?
Sure. Okay, please be seated, everybody. Well, we've got one side.
Things will go much more smoothly.
spirit of asking permission and not forgiveness. This is a billing person who has a responsibility to all Children's to address the allegation that all Children's billed $500,000 for CRPS. Among the codes, of course, includes child neglect and abandonment. It's going to be in front of the jury. I can't imagine that's an issue. It's one of the 12 codes they billed under. So it is what it is.
As long as he is not being presented in any form as a, quote, expert, and he's simply a fact witness, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, he's not a medical doctor. He's not going to testify that, you know, that there was those things. So,
That's basically his affidavit.
I suppose. I don't know.
Are we ready to bring the jury back in?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let's bring in the jury. Hey, members of the jury, just want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct?
Correct.
And defense, your next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. We call Jason Bankert.
Stand here, face the clerk, and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Come this way. You're gonna have a seat in that minute.
May it please the court. Good morning, sir. Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Good morning. My name is Jason Bankert. I'm the Executive Director of Revenue Cycle for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
And Mr. Bankert, you may want to hold the microphone just a little bit closer to you so that way everyone throughout the courthouse can hear you.
I apologize about that.
And just to repeat, can you tell the jury what is your job title?
Yes, I'm the Executive Director of Revenue Cycle Site Services for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
So let me take you back because I have a habit of dating people, not dating them that way, but dating them. It came out awkward. It's Friday morning.
It's all right. It's quite all right.
All right, let's just get this out of the way. We're not dating. I don't know. All right. Let's start over.
Should we call your spouse?
Yeah.
Let's say I have to make a phone call.
Thank goodness
too.
this isn't on national TV. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, tell the jury, where did you go to undergrad?
Yes, I went to school at Bloomsburg University, which is located in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. My undergrad is in finance and business economics, and I was also fortunate enough to attend Bloomsburg University to get my MBA with a concentration in leadership.
And what year did you graduate with your MBA?
I graduated in 2005.
And have you, after you graduated, what type of career or profession did you pursue?
Sure. My first job coming out of college and undergrad was in December 17, 2001. I started out in healthcare finance. I was a financial analyst. That was my first job, and I have spent the last 22 years in various finance, healthcare-related roles.
Have you spent the majority of your career in healthcare finance?
I've spent all of my career in healthcare finance.
And what is your current role at All Children's, Johns Hopkins? If you could explain to the jury, what is your day-to-day?
Sure. So my day-to-day is I make sure that the patient experience from being registered at the visit, right? So when you come in, we make sure that I'm part of the scheduling process, the registration process for the visit, After the patient is seen by the provider, I'm overseeing the coding that is done by the certified coders to make sure that they capture all the services that were rendered. I'm then responsible for making sure that a clean bill goes out the door and follow up with the insurance company to make sure that we receive payment, as well as address any concerns that might be in place for any patient balances that are outstanding afterwards.
We had a chance to meet last night.
That is correct, sir.
And I told you what I was calling you to the witness stand.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Have you had a chance to review the hospital bills for Maya Kowalski for her inpatient stay of October 2016 through January 2017?
Yes, sir, I have. I had the ability to go through and take a look at the hospital claims that were filed on behalf of Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital to Aetna, and was able to take a look and see of all the transactions that took place.
Have you also had a chance to review the interaction between the Kowalskis and Aetna regarding claims, processes, and denials?
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
I was able to receive and take a look at those communications through the online portal between the Kowalskis and Aetna regarding any procedures that were performed or any bills that took place.
Based on your training and experience...
Your Honor, I'm sorry, can we approach briefly?
We may continue, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me just re-ask the question. Did you have a chance to review some of the messaging center printouts between Mrs. Kowalski and Aetna?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. In your experience, in your role at All Children's Hospital, do you interface with insurance companies like Aetna?
We interface with insurance companies all the time, whether it's Aetna or any other payer.
Mm-hmm. And are you aware of the role of All Children's in providing medical records to Aetna for their review?
Yes. What typically happens for a lot of inpatient stays, in which this is, there's a constant communication and feedback between the insurance company, utilization management or case management department, and representing hospitals, case management and utilization management department. And what I had noticed and what I had discovered was from the time of October through about the first week of January, there was 14 correspondences from Aetna asking for clinical documentation in order to make sure that the visit was authorized, meaning that Aetna saw that the care was being provided according and we were performing the services that Aetna had agreed to allow us to perform. So from October through January 7th, approximately, give or take, every week, once a week, we had received these requests for medical documentation, and we provided it to Aetna to ensure that the authorization and medical necessity was meeting the standards.
What does that mean, medical necessity, if you could explain that to the jury?
Sure. Medical necessity, in layman's terms, is that you want to make sure that the care that's being provided to the patient is actually needed. So imagine a scenario where you have a patient who comes into the emergency room and they have a cough, right? Next thing you know, if the provider goes through and does a lung transplant, well, the insurance company is going to say, this patient only had a cough. Why are you doing a lung transplant? That's not necessary. There wasn't need for any of that. You need to treat the symptoms all the way up through to find out that the person only had a flu. So medical necessity is used by insurance companies to ensure that we are providing the proper care to the patient at the right time.
If hypothetically all children's were submitting claims for the medical services being rendered but not actually performing those services, what would happen?
The claim would absolutely deny. There's two types of denials, and this is one thing in my review of the hospital claims that I took a look at. Aetna paid the claims. They never denied the claims once for medical necessity, and they never once denied the claims for no authorization. And those are two key denials that would have typically taken place for any situation that you have when services are rendered that don't match up what the authorization for the work to be performed does.
I'm going to show you what's in evidence as Trial Exhibit 2017-655. Okay. And you could probably zoom in a little bit. Well, let me first ask you, is this a medical bill?
No, sir, this isn't a bill. This appears to be more of a detailed transaction from Aetna itself. This isn't anything that we would have sent as a bill.
So just to be clear, this, what in this trial exhibit, is not a medical bill.
No, it's not a medical bill, sir.
You have experience in reviewing documents like this, though, true?
That is correct, sir.
So let me ask you a little bit, when you see some of the categories, and I'll go to the top, do you see where the date received is 11/8/2016, so that would be about a month after Maya was admitted?
Yes, sir.
And then what is the type of service being billed for?
The type of service being billed for, by the looks of its room and board, based upon what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
Your Honor, we object and would like to approach.
Jury, this is going to take us a few more minutes, so I'm going to ask that you step back to your room. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do an investigation and receive no information.
All rise. Jurors exited.
Mr. Shapiro.
Your Honor, may I have a voir dire the witness before Mr. Shapiro begins?
I'm sorry?
May I have a voir dire the witness before Mr. Shapiro begins?
I'd like to make a profit.
Mr. Shapiro is at the lectern, and
Can we put up trial exhibit 2017-655? Do you see on the right-hand side where it says provider name, Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
That's correct, sir.
And in your review of the hospital bills, you have reviewed the actual hospital bills at All Children's, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And I'll represent to you that the plaintiff never put those in evidence. So what I will ask you at this question, from your review of this transaction report from Aetna, does it appear to you to match the diagnoses code submitted by All Children's to Aetna for Maya Kowalski?
It appears to be in line with what I have seen. That's correct.
And in your training and experience, do you have sufficient knowledge to educate this jury when you look at the diagnoses codes about how those would relate into a bill submitted by All Children's to Aetna?
Yes, sir.
And would you be able to educate the jury about how those codes, well, let me back up. Are you aware whether these were the codes that All Children's generated when they sent them to Aetna?
I have seen many of these codes based upon the claims that I reviewed, sir.
And are you able to educate the jury on how these codes all coming together would form what's called the diagnostic related group?
Yes, sir.
And would you be able to educate the jury on how the diagnostic related group code, when combining these, would generate a medical charge?
Yes, sir.
And have you had sufficient training and experience throughout your career to be able to give that knowledge to the jury?
Yes, sir.
That's all I need for the proffer right now.
Mr. Whitney.
Good morning.
By way of background, if I was listening closely enough, you have an MBA.
That's correct, sir.
And then how long after your MBA did you join Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
I've been with Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. It'll be a year in November, sir. And I've been in healthcare finance for 22 years.
I'm sorry if I missed this. Would you just run through the different entities that you've worked for over those 22 previous years?
Sure. I worked for Geisinger Health System for the first 15 years of my career. Penn State Health for approximately 3 years of my career. Tidal Health for 3 years of my career, and now I've been with Johns Hopkins. It'll be a year in November.
All right. Try to take those in order for me.
Yes, sir.
Geisinger Health?
Geisinger Health System.
This is a hospital system?
It is a massive health system. Approximately $6 billion in annual revenue.
Right. And you worked in providing, I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, within the health system, providing bills to the insurance company.
I was the director of revenue cycle integrity for Geisinger Health System for a period of time that dealt with coding issues, billing issues, CDM issues, charge capture issues, things of that nature.
Sorry, did you say revenue?
Integrity, sir.
Revenue integrity. Okay.
It's to ensure the accuracy of the claim.
So, in revenue integrity and those other roles, they're generating from the hospital side or the health system side, sending this out to the insurer and having a liaison relationship with the insurance company from there.
Yes, sir.
All right. I heard Penn State.
That's correct, sir.
Part of their health system.
Yes, sir.
And was it a similar role to the first, Geisinger?
The role at Penn State Health was I had oversight of the entire revenue cycle for one of their hospitals, St. Joseph's Hospital in Reading, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I was responsible for the entire scope of revenue cycle, not just one piece of it. After that, after we had a merging of data systems, converting onto one EMR and billing platform. We combined all the hospitals under one.
Sure.
I was then responsible for mergers and acquisitions, which led to the implementation of new revenue cycles into any hospital and or physician group that we acquired. I then transitioned into the role of overseeing the entire hospital billing and collections operations for Penn State Health before I transitioned to Title Health.
Understood. Quite an impressive number of roles within Penn State, and at some point involved in mergers and acquisitions. But if I'm understanding correctly, again, your roles there were focused on billing from the hospital or health system side and providing those to the insurance company, and then working out any disputes over payments. Is that right?
Many communications with the insurance companies for payment resolution was also part of the responsibility.
All right. And then the final, before Johns Hopkins, is Title Health.
Title Health, sir.
Would you please explain what Title Health is?
Title Health is a multi-hospital physician group health system on the eastern shore of Maryland, where I oversaw the entire revenue cycle for that health system.
Would it be fair to say that your role there was similar to the previous two health system, hospital systems you worked in?
It's fair to say that that role is similar to what I performed at Penn State Health, and it's very much similar to what I perform now today.
All right. And then your fourth and final role has been with Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
That's correct, sir.
And similar function.
Yes, sir.
All right. Have we covered the span of your career from graduating with your MBA until joining Johns Hopkins and to the present day?
Well, technically, sir, I started after my undergrad at Bloomsburg University.
All right.
And then achieved my MBA while I was working.
Have we missed any significant employment?
No, sir.
All right. It's true that you've never worked for an insurance company.
100%.
You've never worked for Aetna.
That is correct, sir.
You've never, from the insurance company side, been involved in creating a document like what we have at Exhibit 2017.
Can you show me that, please?
Sure. Let's pull up 207-681.
2017?
2017-681. This is an example, and I'll represent to you that, we have several hundred pages,
Okay.
like what you see here.
All right.
You'd agree with me first, this is a record generated by Aetna.
That is correct.
And you've never been involved in crafting a document on behalf of an insurance company similar to the one you see here.
That is correct, sir.
So you don't know, from the insurance company's perspective, what information they rely upon in creating a document like this.
I don't know if I would agree with that, because from the hospital billing standpoint, we would be able to feed that information to the insurance company, which I am assuming this is what their byproduct is.
That's an assumption of yours, yes?
I've never dealt with this side of that piece of healthcare, sir.
You couldn't tell us, for example, if I look at this here, and again, this is 2017-681, what specifically the Aetna person was looking at in coalescing together these diagnostic codes on this specific document.
I'm not understanding your question, sir.
If you see the diagnostic codes there, there's 1,
Yes, sir.
2, 3, 4,
Yep.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them. You can't, you would not be able to say how it is that the Aetna representative decided that those diagnostic codes should go on this document, would you?
What I can tell you is that we provided this information to Aetna via the coding that we have performed. It would show up on our hospital claim, then be submitted to Aetna. How Aetna takes that information and put this particular document together, I can't tell you. But I can tell you that the codes that are on here would not have magically appeared. We would have had to provide that information to Aetna to have them be able to pull that.
I don't know the answer to this question. Are you a trained medical coder?
No, sir.
All right. So you've never performed a role as a medical coder.
Excuse me, sir. No, I'm not a certified professional coder.
Your responsibilities are oversight of revenue cycle, meaning making sure that the bills that go out are paid in a timely and satisfactory basis.
As I stated, sir, my job, Meg, what do I push to you because I have to cough?
should be a little button.
There's a button on the
If
bottom.
not, just turn away from the.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Now, when I oversee the entire revenue cycle, the revenue cycle just isn't coding. The revenue cycle includes scheduling a patient, getting prior authorization for a patient, registering that patient when they show up through the door, overseeing the coding team who's responsible for ensuring that the services that were provided or have an appropriate diagnosis code related to it, which then falls into the billing team to make sure that those diagnosis codes are appropriately attached to a bill to be submitted to the insurance company. I then have to make sure that the insurance company not only pays, but pays properly or appropriately for the services that were rendered, as well as if there's any patient obligation or responsibility after the insurance company pays, to make sure that the follow-up is provided with that patient to collect on their balances. So the revenue cycle is not just coding, sir. It is a very large magnitude of the patient experience.
But again, you're not a medical coder.
That's correct, sir.
And so, for example, if we see a diagnosis code of G90.59, would you know what that is?
I would just read what's on the screen here, and based upon my review, I know it's complex regional pain syndrome.
And within the Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital system, there exists, separate from these documents, an entire set of medical bills that were submitted on behalf of the Kowalski family to Aetna. Yes?
Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital submitted both hospital and professional claims to Aetna for reimbursement.
And do you have those with you here today?
No, sir.
And so are you able to compare those bills to these documents to see how it is that Aetna arrived at this coalescence, this conglomeration of diagnoses on this date compared to the hospital bills?
This here is an incomplete story. I would not be able to definitively match this up to a particular bill that was sent by us.
Nothing else.
Can we put back 2017-655? And Mr. Banker, by the way, in your job, are you called on to review and interpret transaction reports such as these?
In my role, it is not uncommon for me to review any concerns with payer issues.
And do you routinely interface with Aetna and other third parties?
Yes, we have consistent communication with all of our payers.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Sure.
else in proffer that either side wishes to do?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Bankert, if you could wait outside for a couple minutes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Your Honor, this witness has been called by the defense to refute the suggestion that all children's billed $500,000 for CRPS care. As this witness was about to testify, CRPS was one of many diagnoses that gets bundled together into a group of codes that are then submitted to Aetna, that Aetna then reimbursed. He absolutely has foundational knowledge to testify to that, and I don't think the plaintiffs are disputing that. The only thing they're disputing is, can he be shown an Aetna transaction report, which contains a complete mirror image of the all children's bill that the plaintiff failed to put into evidence, and testify on that document and say, based on this, it confirms that All Children's Hospital sent a bill to Aetna for this charge. This was paid with no co-pays, and the diagnoses codes that were submitted for this amount included complex regional pain syndrome along with 11 other diagnoses codes. It was Mr. Kowalski was entitled to take the stand and testify to what all of these documents meant with no foundation that he had any experience at all in interpreting third-party daily transaction reports. Clearly, this witness has vast more experience than Mr. Kowalski does. He knows exactly where the codes came from because he reviewed the medical bills from All Children's and proffered. If it's just a matter of this, I can direct examine him without showing him this, and he can still proffer the same testimony that I reviewed all the All Children's bills, and I can just walk him through it. Did it include these diagnoses, and how does that come together to represent a charge? So I think the only narrow question is, can I do it through this document? And I can tell you from an authenticity standpoint, it absolutely matches the bill that was submitted.
Mr. Whitney.
He has foundational issues. He's never worked at any insurance company to have any foundation or knowledge to comment on how the bills from Aetna that are in evidence are created, how that information is coalesced, why they appear the way they do. He also has never been a medical coder, so he can't comment on the diagnostic codes and how those are arrived at. And that's where this is going to go, to him being allowed to interpret how the Joint Exhibit 1001, the medical records from Johns Hopkins, go from there through a medical coder, he's never been, to the insurance company, and then how the insurance company turns those around and why we see these documents in front of us.
Which is an unknown expert opinion.
Very brief response, Your Honor. It sounds like the plaintiff's position is, without the diagnostic expertise of an expert coming in on medical coding and saying that these codes were not properly done and these are not properly on the bill, that a jury could not hear that information and grasp it. So again, we would move at this point for directed verdict because they've never produced a medical coder, a medical biller, or anyone with the expertise that the plaintiff is now requiring All Children's to bring to trial and refute. They've never put the medical bills in evidence. They've never brought medical coding. They've never brought an expert in medical billing. The window's closed for this, and now they're trying to prevent the defense from bringing an extremely qualified witness. I don't think anyone's disputing that he is qualified to talk about how hospital charges are generated with various diagnosis codes. It's what he does all day, every day. So it's fascinating to the defense that the plaintiff is taking the position that they didn't put the medical bills in evidence, that this testimony before it can go to the jury has to be done from an expert coder, and they have neither.
It seems to me, and I recollect, although I don't remember the exact contours, is there was an agreement between the parties before the plaintiffs rested concerning the medical bill issue.
and I just don't I don't recollect the exact contours of the agreement. I remember when Mr. Altenburn and Mr. Whitney were going back and forth. There was discussions back then about the defendants not moving for a directed verdict if they wouldn't do certain things. And I just don't remember. I'm just...
If I could help clarify.
I don't think it matters at this point. Let me
Okay.
try to talk my way through this. So I do remember that there was some specific issues, although the contours of them I don't recall. What it seems, Mr. Whitney, that you're attempting to have me say is that this witness can't testify to something that it seems like people under him deal with on a day in and a day out basis. He, being this witness, testified he was over the medical coders, and that these are the types of things that are routinely reviewed. So, it seems to me that, yes, he's commenting on a Aetna document, but the reality is you have the same ability to cross-reference the actual medical bill versus the Aetna. And if those two are somehow married to each other, which I suspect they are, although I don't know because I personally haven't gone and done it, but I suspect they are, or pretty close, then a lot of this is kind of a hyper-technical issue. And if the whole point is to seek the truth for the jury, then I don't think it really matters if there's really not a concern that on the Aetna side is somewhat or mostly mirrored to what's on the hospital side, then I'm fine with it, and certainly would give the plaintiffs the ability to cross-examine and suggest that what's on the insurance side somehow doesn't match what's on the hospital. Now, maybe that is the case, and maybe we're going to have an explosive cross-examination on this particular issue of hospital bills.
Sure. Understood.
So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm going to let Mr. Shapiro continue with this witness. Let's bring in this witness. Let's bring in the jury. Is the monitor okay? Well, do we have a spill down there?
No.
Oh,
That's wet down.
Okay, members of the jury want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation or received no information, is that correct? Okay, and also that you haven't seen any media about this case? And no one's approached you? Mr. Shapiro, you may continue.
Thank you. Clay, if you don't mind putting back up Trial Exhibit 2017-655. And Mr. Banker, in your role, are you familiar? Do you oversee the people that do medical billing and coding?
Yes, sir.
In your role, are you familiar with what the various diagnosis codes are?
From what I'm seeing here, yes, sir.
And again, we left off looking at the top. Type of service provided was what, sir?
It appeared to be room and board.
Okay. So let me talk to you about the diagnosis codes. Do you see down below there's approximately 12 of them?
Yes, sir.
What I'd like you to tell the jury is this. How do these diagnoses codes generate into... Well, before I do that, actually, let me ask you, how do these diagnoses codes relate to a medical charge? How do these come together?
Sure. So these diagnosis codes, what happens is a provider goes in, they see the patient, they do some form of workup with the patient, whether it's a consult, whether there was labs performed, whether there was any testing done, any services rendered. So a physician or provider is responsible for documenting all of the services that they render on that patient. Okay? Then we have a group of certified coders who go in, read the chart, read what services were performed, and then assign the appropriate CPT or HCPCS code for those services rendered.
So, actually, let's put up 1001-31, 0031, 1001-0031, and if you can go to the next page. Next page, please. I'll get there eventually. Next page. Next page. Next page. And one more page. Okay. Mr. Danke, I'll represent to you that this is the history and physical, that Maya Kowalski came into All Children's Hospital on October 7th. And Clay, if you can highlight under impressions and chronic diagnoses. Do you see where it says complex regional pain syndrome diagnosed by outpatient physicians?
That's correct, sir.
Is this the type of information that, in your experience overseeing coding, that the coders would look for to see what types of diagnosis codes to put on a medical bill?
Yes, sir. They would take a look at this.
So let's go back to what we were talking about, Trial Exhibit 2017655. And again, we'll expand. There you go. So now we see the first diagnosis there of complex regional pain syndrome. And then there's a number of other diagnoses codes on the left. So, for example, they line up, but maybe you can help. Is the G90.59, what is that diagnosis code for?
That represents complex regional pain syndrome.
And then the T76-02XA, what is that?
Child neglect or abandonment suspected.
And then the next one, B37.81.
Yeah, candidal esophagitis.
Okay. In fairness, you're not a medical doctor, right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. So, without wasting time and going through all 12, can you explain to the jury how did these 12 diagnoses codes get on there? Is that from the coding process?
That's from the provider documenting all the services that they have rendered, and then a coder, a professional certified coder, comes in and actually assigns the codes based upon the services that are rendered. And there's a separation of those kinds of duties to ensure the accuracy and integrity of what's being done.
Yeah, and can you, if you can explain to the jury, what do you mean by that separation of duties?
Yeah, we like to ensure that the coders, every organization that I've ever worked at, the professional or certified coding teams have a working relationship with the providers, but they do not have a reporting relationship to the providers. We do that to allow for accuracy and integrity of the work that's being done. We want to ensure that the coders are not biased in what they're utilizing for the codes that they're putting down for the services that are rendered.
So, how does these codes work together to generate a bill?
So these codes work together to create a DRG, which is a diagnosis-related grouping that is submitted on a claim.
Okay, and what is a DRG? Like, is there like? Do you pick that? Does a computer pick it? How's that?
Yeah, so the DRG is generated. So DRG's diagnosis-related grouping. To better understand what a DRG is, think of an everything pizza, right? You have the dough, you got the sauce, then you got the cheese, then you got the mushrooms, peppers, onions, the bacon, pepperoni, all that good stuff, right? Well, the DRG is that pizza. It's the all-encompassing of all the ingredients that were created. So these diagnoses codes, when combined together, create a DRG, which is then fired and triggered by the system to go out on the door on a claim.
And is the charge that goes from All Children's to Aetna based on that DRG?
The charge is based upon the DRG.
So, to be very clear, when All Children's is submitting a charge for $69,621, that's not for just complex regional pain syndrome, is it?
No, sir. Based upon what I'm seeing here, there's multiple services that were rendered, and because of the type of service, room and board, I would imagine that was part of the charges as well. In fact, when I looked at the hospital bills that we had submitted on behalf of All Children's Hospital, the vast majority of the charges were actually room and board, respiratory therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy.
Do you remember the exact charge for room and board as they sit here today?
Room and board charges are typically around $4,500 a day, give or take, in that range.
Well, let me ask you, do you remember what the monthly charge for room and board, or would it refresh your recollection if I showed you the bill?
Can you show me the bill, please, sir?
If I may approach you.
You may show it to Mr. White first.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
And if you can tell the jury this, what is the charge on the all children's bill for the room and board?
Yeah, so we have PEDS beds days of 23 units, meaning that patient was in a bed for 23 days. Those charges were for $69,621. We then have 7 units or 7 days where the patient was in an ICU bed, and those charges were $50,071.
Let me stop you there. On the first one, you said that the charge submitted for the bed was $69,621?
For all 23 days, sir.
Okay, and if you look on your screen, does that match the charge submitted for room and board?
It's very much so, yes, sir.
If I may approach you?
You may.
Oh, and by the way, do the diagnosis codes on this sheet match the diagnosis codes on the hospital bill in front of you?
At glance, yes, sir.
Okay, if I may approach. To your knowledge, is that room and board charge there regardless of the actual diagnoses?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so let me ask you next about the process. And I think you sort of talked to the jury earlier about what would happen. Well, let me ask you, in your position as the billing, in your position overseeing finance at All Children's, what would happen if All Children's wasn't providing care for these 12 diagnoses codes? What would you expect to see?
Yeah.
Foundation.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yeah, so what we would expect to see, it's not uncommon practice for any insurance company to deny a claim if they feel that the claim was billed in error. In this instance here, the claims that we had submitted to Aetna, none of the claims that we have submitted, to my recollection, have ever been denied for either med necessity or no authorization or for any reason whatsoever. In fact, Aetna actually paid us for the services rendered that we had there.
So, for example, if All Children's Hospital was representing to Aetna that they were billing for complex regional pain syndrome but not providing services for that, in your experience, would Aetna have rejected the claim?
There would have been a denial.
So let me show you what next is Trial Exhibit 2017-767. And again, if you can pull it out a little bit there at the top, again, under the provider name, this was from All Children's Hospital. Do you see that, Mr. Bain?
Yes, sir.
And then this was, for example, the January 5th bill. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And to the extent you know, why is there a charge submitted and an amount paid?
From what I could see here, the diagnosis code T74.92XA was the diagnosis code. What this bill is relating to, from what I'm seeing here, it looks like it's 26 services for $78,702, and the type of service rendered is room and board.
Okay. So, I guess the simpler question I was trying to ask you, there's a difference in what All Children submit and what they get paid by Aetna. Is that based on the contractual?
Oh,
rates?
absolutely. So what you see submitted as charges, we have a contract with any insurance company any insurance company that we have a contract with. We have agreed upon reimbursement for those services rendered. In this instance, we had charged $78,702 for the services rendered. We had agreed to accept as payment $44,073 for all the services that we provided on that for that claim.
Okay. And just to be clear, and I think everyone here, for better or for worse, has experience with medical bills, the difference is not because Aetna said we didn't provide the services, that's just the contracted reimbursement.
It's a contractual adjustment that is taken.
Okay. And the bills that are going are actually, what you're billing for is for the procedures and the services, not for the codes. Is that
That's
fair?
correct, sir.
Okay. So, and in this case, I would direct your attention to the diagnoses codes. Do you see that in January, the diagnosis of complex regional pain syndrome fell from 1st to 5th?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes, sir.
And at least at this point, the child maltreatment had now risen to the primary diagnosis.
It was the primary focus of care, sir.
And is that what the medical coders are picking up in their review of the medical bills?
It's based upon the most services that are being rendered at that point in time for the care of the patient.
And in your review of the records, did you see at any point on this bill or any of the bills Aetna saying that the services provided by All Children's did not match what All Children's represented to Aetna that they were performing?
No, I looked at two batches of information. I looked at the hospital bills that we submitted as an organization and validated that we have never received a denial for med necessity or no authorization. I also reviewed the correspondence between Ms. Kowalski and Aetna regarding physician services that were rendered. And I went through and I reviewed every one of those pages. And what I thought was interesting was it tells you very clearly in those documents whether or not a service was paid. And it would call out claim processed as in-network, meaning that the insurance company processed that claim. When I was going down through and looking at the correspondence, what was very intriguing was out of all those claims that I read and reviewed in that correspondence, there was one that was actually denied. And it was denied for $11 for a pathologist charge that was overseeing, some lab results. And that really struck me because that tells me the thoroughness that Aetna was utilizing to evaluate all the claims that we were sending, that they just weren't, just signing off on everything, that they were actually reviewing everything that we were sending in for submission of reimbursement to the fact that they found an $11 charge that they said, no, this is part of a bundled payment. But that's the only denial that I saw out of all the correspondence.
Yeah, let me put up trial exhibit 2438-005. And they're grainy, so we're going to focus on the top half of that. It's hard to see. Is this the one that you said was the $11? Oh, sorry. I think this one was approved. Is that right? Is that how I read this?
Yeah, it's on the state. There's one.
Yeah, I think it's at 2438-025. We'll focus in a little bit.
Yes.
So from your entire review of all the Aetna Messaging Center documents and all the records and all the bills, of the totality that All Children submitted, there was only a dispute from Aetna for $11. Is that right?
That's what I'm seeing right here, sir.
Okay. Based on your review of all the All Children's documents, all of the responses from Aetna, the fact that Aetna agreed that the services provide... Well, let me ask you, when Aetna responds back to the hospital with an agreement to pay the bill, does that indicate to you whether they have found that the bills were medically necessary in relationship to the services?
I have found in my experience through 20 plus years in healthcare finance, insurance companies will deny claims for a multitude of reasons, up to and including medical necessity and no authorization. And I have not seen any of that in the notes that I reviewed here or in the hospital claims that I reviewed, sir.
While we're on that subject, you did have a chance to review a number of claims. Let me ask you about this. if we can go to Trial Exhibit 2017. (202). If you can expand a little bit. This, again, would be similar to that Aetna, what did you call it before?
It looks like a transaction report, sir.
Okay. And if you look on the sort of right-hand side in the first column, it says Quorum. It's a pharmacy company.
Mm-hmm.
That's not all children's.
That's not all children, sir.
Okay. Do you know why this was submitted to the jury?
I can't tell you why it was submitted to the jury.
What about, let's go to the same exhibit number, but at 266. Expand a little bit. This is from Dr. Ashroff Hanna for services in, looks like February of 2016 before the hospitalization at issue. This isn't related to anything all children's did, right?
That doesn't appear to be an all children's provider, sir.
Overruled.
So let's go back and just confirm. You can take that down if you want, Clay. Did all children's bill? Yeah.
Let's see for a second.
Sure. Just a couple more questions, Mr. Baker. Did all children's bill Aetna $500,000 for complex regional pain syndrome?
No, sir. Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital billed $500,000 for a litany of services that were rendered. It wasn't complex regional pain syndrome. In fact, as I stated before, the vast majority of charges that we submitted were tied to room and board, respiratory therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy, along with a litany of other diagnoses that were performed on the patient.
I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Whitney.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Before we start talking about the bills, I just wanted to make sure I understood your career correctly.
Sir.
And you and I had a moment to speak outside the presence of the jury, so I won't try to rehash the whole thing. But am I correct that you've worked in the field for approximately 22 years?
I've worked in healthcare finance for approximately 22 years, sir.
Right. And although you've been with several different hospital systems or health systems, during those 22 years, you have worked never for an insurance company. Is that true?
That is correct.
And so, as you sit here today, for example, if we put up Exhibit 2017741, and it's similar to the documents you were just shown by defense counsel. I've just selected one here. You've never been involved in the creation of an insurance record like the one before you.
That is correct.
Right. All of your experience is drawn from the hospital side in submitting bills to the insurance companies.
All my experience has been on the provider side, sir.
Provider side, excuse me.
Sir.
Your testimony, however, is that the hospital bills bear a one-to-one relationship, a mere relationship with these documents, correct?
My testimony is that I've reviewed the hospital claims, and based upon what I've seen here, there appears to be a match in what we have submitted to what this document is providing.
All right, so the jury can rely on the fact that looking at these Aetna documents, these are based upon the bills that Johns Hopkins submitted to Aetna.
I wouldn't make that leap, sir. I didn't create this report. What I'm telling you is that the information that we submit on claims, Aetna's pulling this information from somewhere off of the claims that we had submitted to them.
Can you or can you not testify to the validity of these bills?
I can testify, well, these are not bills, sir, but I can testify to the validity of the bills that we had sent to Aetna, and I can also intelligently explain what this stuff, what, a lot of these items are talking about here on the screen.
All right. Looking at this, I'm sorry, you don't call this a bill. What do you call this?
It looks like some form of transaction report, sir.
All right. Looking at this transaction report, you'd agree with me that this particular one is from December 6th, 2016?
That is the date that it was received, sir. So are you asking for when it received the bill, or are you talking about the services, or the date of the services being rendered?
The date that Aetna received the bill from Johns Hopkins Health Children's Hospital.
12/6/2016.
All right. And I know you focused with defense counsel on a couple of bills that were for room and board. This one says type of service, hospital ancillary. You didn't focus on any of those with him. Would you please explain what hospital ancillary is?
Well, it's hospital ancillary, and its ancillary services are typically any services that are provided on a patient for a multitude of factors that are taking place. So if you look here, the ancillary care involves complex regional pain syndrome, child neglect, candidal esophagitis, unspecified protein, calorie, malnutrition. When you see on the diagnosis codes here, sir, all these services and these diagnosis codes were individual services provided to that patient. So there are a multitude of services that were rendered on that patient to generate the charges submitted.
We're talking about medical services here.
That is correct, sir.
All right. And you testified earlier that the top diagnostic code is the focal point of that bill, correct?
The top diagnosis code is typically where a lot of the work is being focused on at that point in time of care.
And although you're not a medical biller or coder, but you oversee them.
That's correct, sir.
Right? You're aware that certain diagnostic codes carry a higher reimbursement rate than others.
That's correct, sir.
All right. So, for example, something like complex regional pain syndrome carries a higher reimbursement rate than, let's say, constipation.
I wouldn't agree with that, sir.
You wouldn't?
I would not agree with that because the reason is the DRG that was submitted to Aetna for the hospital claims that we sent through, there was no specific reimbursement for the DRG. It actually triggered a per diem reimbursement model that we had with Aetna at that point in time. So I would not sit there and say that CRPS would generate increase, decrease, or remain neutral any DRG because a DRG consists of multiple services that are provided, not just one.
You'd agree with me that complex regional pain syndrome is the focal point of this bill on December 6th?
I would agree that complex regional pain syndrome is the top line in this.
All right. And you've described the top line as the focal point earlier, right? You're not backing off that testimony, are you?
No, sir.
All right. Now, charge submitted, $18,000, and then amount paid just over $10,000, again, for services, bills delivered in December 2016, with the focal point being complex regional pain syndrome, just over $10,000, correct?
There was also appears to be 12 other services that were rendered.
My question was, is complex regional pain syndrome the focal point of this bill where $10,000 was paid?
I can tell you that complex regional pain syndrome is part of what we had submitted for the
Are you
bill.
backing off your testimony about the top line being a focal point?
I would ask that Mr. Whitney give a witness the time to respond.
I think he has, so you can continue.
Okay.
Are you backing off your testimony that the top line of the bill is the focal point?
No, sir.
All right. So you'd agree with me that as December 2016, the focal point of this $10,000 that Johns Hopkins received was complex regional pain syndrome.
It appears to be, sir.
All right. Now, you talked a lot about how Aetna never challenged the billing and paid for all the billing.
Yes, sir.
All right. When Aetna communicates with someone like yourself inside the hospital system, how do they cross-check whether the diagnoses are valid or invalid?
So for this instance, there's a utilization management department inside the insurance company, and we have a utilization case management department and inpatient financial clearance teams. They work in conjunction to make sure that the services that we're going to provide are authorized to be performed. And during that period of time, there is communication or sometimes medical requests for information to maintain the authorization or to keep the care, to make sure that the approved treatment plan is going forward. Once the authorizations are completed and you continue to send, and like I stated earlier, then from October through January, the first week of January, there was 14 correspondences between Aetna asking for medical review or medical documents and All Children's Hospital that we provided. Once all that has been taken into consideration, we then send a bill to the insurance company to be adjudicated. If what we send does not line up with what is authorized, there will be a denial for a no authorization or a medical necessity, sir.
All right. Thank you for the explanation. In substantiating the billing, you provide them medical records on occasion.
As requested, sir.
As requested by Aetna, and here 14 different occasions.
Yeah, it appeared about every week, sir.
And the documentation you provide with the medical records.
That is correct, sir.
All right. So, and what the insurance company is looking for is to see if the diagnosis that you're submitting bills for is actually present in the medical records.
They're making sure that it's...
Right. So if a diagnosis that the hospital doesn't believe in is still carried forward in the medical records beyond the point that they believe that to be a diagnosis, insurance company doesn't know the difference, do they?
I can't honestly answer that question, sir. I don't know what you... Can you ask it again?
Sure. Let me ask it a different way.
Yeah.
If you have physicians that came in here and testified that as of November 7th, they didn't believe complex regional pain syndrome was a diagnosis, insurance company doesn't know that, do they?
I don't know. I don't handle the mindset of the
that doctor keeps the diagnosis in the record. Insurance company looks, says it's still in the record. They don't actually interview the doctor and say, do you really believe this?
Well, I would disagree with you because, and here's why. It's not uncommon for insurance companies to sit there and ask for a peer-to-peer review with medical providers to ensure that the care is being done. That does happen.
In submitting these bills, can you just guess? Can you just guess at the diagnoses?
No, sir.
So if an anesthesiologist came in here, and when he's asked, does this child have complex regional pain syndrome or not? And the response is, what do you mean? Is that valid?
Objection, mischaracterization of evidence.
Overruled.
Ask your question again, please, sir.
If the anesthesiologist on the case doesn't even know if complex regional pain syndrome is a valid diagnosis or not, is this a valid bill?
Objection, argument.
Overruled.
If the anesthesiologist, their job is to perform the services that is rendered or asked of them, and they will document that into the note, and then the coder will come in and provide the diagnosis code related behind it.
Right.
So the difference is that you need to understand, and I think is that the services rendered would be captured by the coders, and that the fact that the coders are a separate entity from the providers, if it's in the record and it's documented and it's captured,
Right.
they will code accordingly for it.
Right. So if you have an anesthesiologist who doesn't know what the diagnosis is, testify to that, but put it down in the record, it's properly coded as far as the insurance company is concerned, because when they look at the medical record, there it is.
You still have to perform the services to treat.
You're aware in your various roles that as a hospital, when you send out bills to the insurance company, those create financial obligations not just for the insurance company, but for the patient and their family, right?
Depending on the insurance plan they have, yes, sir.
Majority
and
of the
depending
time.
on, well, may I explain?
Is it true or not that in certain instances,
He can finish his answer.
go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. The reason why it's important to understand is because it depends on if there's secondary insurance or not, and who that secondary insurance is. So that's why it matters, because in instances where we bill insurance companies for it, if there's a secondary insurance, and depending on who that secondary insurance is, the ability to bill the patient afterwards may not be allowed.
Here, let me ask it this way. Have you looked to see what kind of financial obligation the hospital's billing for complex regional pain syndrome as the focal point, even as late as December and January, created for the Kowalski family?
I have not, I'm not aware of any.
You can't speak to that, right?
That is correct, sir.
All right. No further questions this time.
Sure.
So, Mr. Banker, I think, just to be clear, when All Children's is sending a bill that includes a diagnosis of CRPS among the diagnostic-related group to Aetna, before Aetna pays that, they're checking when requesting records to see did All Children's provide medically necessary services for that code. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
So if the jury has heard testimony from experts that the treatment for CRPS is physical therapy, occupational therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy, what Aetna is doing before they pay their bills when they're requesting records is to see did All Children's provide those services in relation to the code. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
And in your review of the entire months of my estate, did Aetna ever reject those bills for CRPS?
We have not received any denials for medical necessity or authorization that I've not seen.
And even to this day, in 2023, years later, that's still true. Aetna still has not.
I am not aware of them recouping any dollars for any services rendered.
And from your review of the bills, did you see whether, I know you said a copay zero, do you know if Mr. Kowalski ever paid anything?
I am not aware of any patient obligation or anything that has been paid.
No other questions,
One more question. Were you aware that the Johns Hopkins expert that came in here to testify about CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, testified that Maya never had that condition?
Sir, I'm not aware of anything that has taken place prior to me being here today.
No other questions.
Members of the jury, Mr. Bankert, there's several questions, but before that, there was a question from one of the jurors about the medical bills and I just forgot what I was going to say.
You want me to remind you, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
That the attorneys are working on the submissions to the jury, which should hopefully include the relevant medical bills.
There we go. And why I couldn't remember that just 10 seconds previous, I don't know. Now, Mr. Bankert, the questions are from the jury. Can you tell us, if you know, the interval criteria that utilization review uses for CRPS?
I cannot tell you the interval specific to CRPS. What I can tell you is the submission between October and January. There was 14 requests from Aetna for us to provide the medical records to them for the services that we were rendering. But as far as individually for CRPS, no, sir.
Again, if you know, can you tell us the interval criteria that utilization criteria use for conversion disorder?
Once again, the criteria for a specific disorder is dependent upon how long the authorization is good for. Okay, so when for some services that we have to render as a provider, we have to get authorization from the insurance company to be able to perform before we can even perform those services. Okay, and so the authorization to be able to perform those services has to take place for a period of time, and that authorization only lasts for so long before you have to go back and ask again to continue that level of care.
Just hold that for the next round.
It's the wording.
I'm sorry?
It's the wording.
It's the wording?
Yeah.
Sorry. QUAL?
Yeah, interqual.
Interqual.
Yeah.
I apologize. So, can you tell us the interqual criteria, that utilization criteria they use for conversion disorder?
I cannot. The case management or utilization management team would be able to answer that question. With me personally, I cannot. I'm not a case manager by trade.
Now,
good question.
The next question, again, if you know, can you tell us the criteria for unspecified child maltreatment confirmed?
Can you read that again, Your Honor, please?
If you know, can you tell us the criteria for unspecified child maltreatment confirmed?
Unfortunately, that falls along the lines of a professional or certified coder, and I do not have that certification. There would have to be documentation in the record to call that out for the coder to be able to come in and classify that diagnosis.
Is this correct? The coder will place the primary diagnosis first?
The amount of care that is provided, okay, to trigger what is going on the most, that will automatically move up to the top. So whatever's the focal point of care at that point in time will have a tendency to rise to the top. It's also, I think, very important to understand that a lot of times what starts out as the focal point of care when a patient comes in through our doors doesn't end up being the focal point of care at a later point in time. We have a common practice. It is common practice in healthcare that when a patient comes to our facility, that outside physicians or outside providers who are rendering care give us, some form of background, some form of information of services that they're providing for this patient or treatment that's being done. And that's usually what we start out with. And that's usually what starts out with in the care of the patient because of the expertise of that outside provider or the feedback that we get from that patient. But as the stay continues, that can obviously change in terms of what's being treated.
Can you describe
to the jury what a DRG is?
Yes, sir. The DRG stands for Diagnosis-Related Groupings. What happens, and it goes back to the pizza analogy that I provided, there's multiple diagnoses that are provided for that patient during their care for that period of time, okay? And when you bundle them all together, they're individual diagnoses, but when you bundle them all together, it triggers what is classified as the DRG, or diagnosis-related grouping. What that means is, hey, all these services that you rendered fall in line in treating this type of particular illness or this kind of particular malady, okay? And so that DRG is then submitted on the hospital side through to the insurance companies to go through the reimbursement process.
Following that question, is that bundle payment for a specific diagnosis?
That bundle payment is not for a specific diagnosis. That bundle payment is for all the services that were rendered to treat the patient for that period of care. As I mentioned previously, it covers, there was multiple maladies that DRG covered, as well as the room and board, the physical therapy, the occupational therapy, and the respiratory therapy that was taking place. So it wasn't just for a particular diagnosis, it's for all of the services that we performed, including room and board and the therapies.
When you say the hospital billed for meds, PT, OT, respiratory therapy, what diagnosis did you bill those under? There has to be a diagnosis tied to those services, question mark?
Yeah, so when all those services are rendered, they are added together with all the other services that we do, okay? Whether it was administration of any medications, whether it was lab work, whether it was anything else that we did during that period of time, the therapies, along with the other services that we did, would all get wrapped together to be part of that DRG or part of that reimbursement. They have revenue codes that are assigned to each one of them individually, and codes that are assigned to them individually, that when you combine them together, form that diagnosis-related grouping.
Do you work closely with the utilization review team in your hospital?
I have the privilege of overseeing the case management and utilization management team at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
When a patient is admitted to the hospital, isn't it correct the utilization team will review the diagnosis the patient was admitted under and use the interqual criteria to see if the patient meets the admission guidelines for that diagnosis, in this case CRPS. If Maya did not meet the guidelines for the diagnosis of CRPS per interqual, there would have to have been a peer-to-peer review with physicians, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Then every few days, the utilization team will perform a concurrent review to continue to be sure Maya's care and treatment continues to meet guidelines for inpatient admission and get authorization from her insurance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Mr. Shapiro, I've now completed the reading of the jurors' questions. Do you have any further questions?
No, I appreciate the education. I don't, thank you.
Yeah, mercy.
You don't want to ask what interqual is? I'm being facetious. May this witness be excused.
Yes,
or actually, members of the jury, did you have any other questions?
He may be excused.
And release from all subpoenas?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you all's time. Take care.
$140 for the jury to be back, ready to go. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information.
All rise. Jurors exit.
the jury's out of our presence, any issues we need to address before we
Not
go?
from the defense.
And if we were back at 125, is that appropriate?
Yes, sir.
Did you say 140 to the jury?
What 140 for the jury, 125 for us, giving us 15 minutes.
Yes.
See you at 125.